She was the quiet girl, the outcast, the one everyone ignored, until they decided to make her life a living hell. Margaret Whitman was bullied relentlessly in high school, mocked for being different. She escaped that town, but the scars never left her. Years later, she returned with a deadly plan. What happened next shocked the entire town, leaving parents grieving and a chilling lesson carved in history. This is a story of pain, revenge, and regret, one you won't forget. If you love gripping true crime stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling content. The halls of Fairview High School in Millwood, Pennsylvania, echoed with laughter, but Margaret never laughed with them. She walked with her head down, gripping her books tightly, her thick glasses sliding down her nose. She had learned early on that drawing attention only meant one thing: pain. "Ah, poor little orphan," Josh Reynolds sneered, shoving past her in the hallway. His best friend, Brandon Lewis, smirked. "Maybe if your real mom loved you, she wouldn't have thrown you away like trash." Margaret's chest tightened. Emma Carter and Rachel Donovan, the girls who followed Josh and Brandon like shadows, giggled cruelly. "Maybe she realized you'd never fit in," Rachel whispered, flicking Margaret's glasses off her face. They all walked away, their laughter ringing in her ears. Margaret fell to her knees, blindly reaching for her glasses. A tear slipped down her cheek. That night, she told her adoptive mother, Laura Whitman, that she couldn't take it anymore. Laura, a kind but overworked woman, stroked her hair. "We'll leave, sweetheart. We'll start over somewhere new," she promised. Margaret should have felt relief, but as she stared at her reflection, another thought crept in. One day, they will pay for what they did to me. Millwood disappeared in the rearview mirror, but it never left Margaret's mind. Even in a new town, at a new school, the memories clung to her like a second skin. The whispers, the taunts, the feeling of being nothing. Laura did everything she could to make her happy. New clothes, a fresh start. But Margaret had already learned a bitter truth. Happiness wasn't meant for people like her. She grew up lonely, never making close friends, never trusting anyone. Boys never noticed her, and she convinced herself that love was just another lie. She focused on her studies, excelling in school, but success didn't erase the scars. Nothing did. Then one night, she made the decision. Sitting in the dim glow of her apartment, now in her mid-20s, she searched for Fairview High School online. The town hadn't changed much, but something else caught her eye. The names. Josh Reynolds, Brandon Lewis, Rachel Donovan, still living in Millwood, and they had children. Margaret's hands trembled as she gripped her phone. This is it. This is how it ends. By the next morning, she had already applied for a teaching job at Fairview High School. She would return, but this time, it would be on her terms. Margaret drove into Millwood just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over familiar streets. Nothing had changed. The same diners, the same quiet houses, and the same suffocating small-town atmosphere. But this time, she wasn't a scared little girl they used to torment. This time, she was in control. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as she passed a real estate office. And there he was, Brandon Lewis. Older now, heavier, but still with that smug expression. He laughed with a co-worker, oblivious to the fact that the girl he destroyed was watching him. Margaret's pulse quickened. He has no idea. None of them do. The next morning, she walked through the halls of Fairview High School, this time as Ms. Whitman, the new English teacher. Her heels clicked against the tiled floors, the scent of floor polish and old textbooks washing over her. Then she saw them. Ethan Reynolds, Maddie Lewis, Jacob Donovan. Their faces were a reflection of their parents at that age. They were young, naive, trusting. They had no idea that their new favorite teacher had been waiting her whole life for this moment. She smiled warmly at them. "I think we're going to be great friends." And just like that, the trap was set. Margaret played the long game. She wasn't impulsive. Revenge, she knew, had to be earned, crafted like a slow-burning fire. She made sure to be the teacher every student loved, kind, patient, understanding. She paid attention to the ones who were ignored, encouraged the ones who doubted themselves. But most importantly, she focused on Ethan, Maddie, and Jacob. She learned their routines, their secrets. Ethan Reynolds, Josh's son, was desperate for approval, constantly overshadowed by his father's expectations. Maddie Lewis, Brandon's daughter, was reckless, always looking for excitement. Jacob Donovan, Rachel's son, was quiet but eager to belong. Margaret became their safe place. "Ms. Whitman, you're honestly the best teacher here," Maddie said one afternoon, lingering after class. "I feel like I can talk to you about anything." Margaret smiled warmly, her heart pounding. "That's exactly what I want." She listened as Ethan vented about his overbearing father. She nodded as Maddie complained about feeling trapped in a boring town. She gave Jacob the attention he never got at home. Slowly, they clung to her, trusted her. They had no idea she was leading them to their final moment. Months passed, and Margaret's plan unfolded like a carefully written novel. The more the children trusted her, the closer she got to the moment she had been waiting for her whole life. One afternoon, as class ended, the three teens lingered behind, laughing about their weekend plans. "I wish we had a place to hang out without our parents breathing down our necks," Maddie groaned. "Every time we throw a party, someone's mom ruins it." Margaret leaned against her desk, pretending to hesitate. Then she spoke, planting the seed. "Well, if you really need a place, I suppose my house is available," she said with a smile. "I live alone. No one would bother us." The teens exchanged excited glances. "Are you serious, Ms. Whitman?" Ethan asked. "You'd let us throw a party at your house?" Margaret chuckled. "Of course. I trust you guys." The words felt poisonous on her tongue, but they worked. The teens were thrilled, completely unaware they had just stepped into her trap. As they left, Margaret watched them go, her smile fading. The stage was set. The fire was coming. The excitement in the teens' voices was contagious. By the next day, word had spread. Ms. Whitman was hosting the party of the year. Margaret played the role perfectly, setting rules that made her seem like the responsible, cool teacher. "No alcohol, no crazy behavior," she said with a playful smile. "Just music, snacks, and a good time." They adored her for it. That night, Margaret stood in front of her mirror, staring at herself. She had come so far, from the scared little girl, crying in the hallways to the woman who held the power. A slow, eerie smile formed on her lips. Tonight, it ends. By 8 p.m., the teens arrived, laughing, shouting, filling her quiet home with energy. Ethan, Maddie, and Jacob were right in the center of it, dancing, drinking soda, completely unaware they were celebrating their own demise. Margaret watched them, her stomach twisting for the briefest moment. She felt something almost like guilt, but then she remembered their parents, their laughter, the way they had destroyed her. And just like that, the guilt burned away. She slipped away upstairs, preparing for what came next. The house would burn before sunrise. As the party raged downstairs, Margaret moved quietly, efficiently. She carried the gasoline canister she had hidden in her closet, pouring thin. Careful lines along the hallways, the stairwell, the exits. The smell was strong, overpowering, but the loud music below masked everything. She moved the front door, locking it, then the back door. The windows were already latched tight. There would be no way out. Downstairs, Ethan, Maddie, and Jacob were laughing, oblivious. They had no idea their final hours had begun. Margaret lingered at the edge of the room, watching them. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. This is it. This is the moment. Then, as the party wound down, students started leaving in pairs, calling goodbyes. Soon, only 3 remained. "We should clean up a bit," Margaret suggested, her voice warm. "You guys don't have to, but it would help a lot." Ethan, Maddie, and Jacob nodded. "Of course, Ms. Whitman." Maddie grinned. "You're the best." Margaret smiled back, but inside her pulse pounded. They were trapped now. She turned, heading upstairs. It was time to light the fire. Margaret stood at the top of the stairs, the gasoline fumes thick in the air. She reached into her pocket, her fingers wrapping around the box of matches. Downstairs, Ethan, Maddie, and Jacob were laughing as they cleaned up the last of the party mess, completely unaware that their teacher was about to kill them. Margaret struck the first match. A tiny flame danced at the tip, flickering, alive. For a brief second, she hesitated. Could she really go through with this? Then she heard it, Maddie's voice, light and casual. Can you imagine Ms. Whitman as a teenager? I bet she was a quiet nerd no one noticed. Ethan laughed. Totally. She probably got bullied all the time. Jacob snorted. Yeah, I mean, look at her. She's nice and all, but kind of weird, right? Margaret's blood turned to ice. Even their children laughed at her. Rage surged through her. The match fell from her fingers. The gasoline caught instantly. Flames roared to life, racing across the floor, down the stairs, swallowing the house in a wave of heat and destruction. Margaret stepped back, watching as her world burned. Below, the screams began. The moment the fire caught, panic set in. What the hell? Ethan shouted, spinning around as flames erupted along the stairwell. Smoke thick and fast, curling into the living room like grasping fingers. Maddie coughed violently, backing away. Where's the exit? We have to get out. Jacob rushed to the front door, yanking on it. It wouldn't budge. Locked. The windows. Maddie screamed, but as she ran to one, she froze. They were latched shut, sealed. There was no way out. Upstairs, Margaret stood calmly, watching as they scrambled like trapped animals. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't fear, it was power. Ethan's eyes shot up to her, wild with desperation. Ms. Whitman, help U.S. Margaret took a slow step forward, the heat licking at her heels. The house was crumbling, burning, suffocating. Then she smiled. This is what your parents deserve, she whispered. The fire roared louder, drowning out their screams. The fire spread mercilessly, devouring everything in its path. Smoke choked the air, making it impossible to breathe. Ethan, Maddie, and Jacob stumbled, coughing, their eyes burning as they searched for an escape. Panic turned to terror. The back door! Jacob yelled, sprinting through the thick smoke. He grabbed the doorknob and twisted, locked. Margaret had planned everything. Ethan slammed his fist against the wall. Ms. Whitman, please, you have to help us. Margaret stood at the top of the burning staircase, watching them struggle. She had imagined this moment for years. The fire reflected in her glasses, making her eyes look inhuman. You don't understand, she said, voice eerily calm. I've been waiting for this my whole life. Flames lunged toward her, but she didn't flinch. Maddie's eyes filled with terror. You're insane. Margaret tilted her head. No, Maddie, I'm finally free. The ceiling groaned as the fire consumed the structure. The house was about to collapse, and none of them were getting out alive. The screams grew louder, then vanished into the flames. The fire raged, swallowing everything. Walls cracked, beams snapped, and the roof trembled, ready to cave in. The air was thick with smoke and death. Ethan, Maddie, and Jacob were running out of time. We have to break a window. Ethan coughed, his voice hoarse. He grabbed a chair, hurling it at the glass. It shattered, but thick metal bars were behind it. No escape. Maddie sobbed, covering her mouth. She locked us in here to die. Jacob fell to his knees, his strength failing. I don't want to die, he whispered. Upstairs, Margaret smiled through the smoke. Her glasses fogged from the heat, her body drenched in sweat, but she didn't move. This was exactly how it was supposed to end. Do you feel it now? She murmured. The fear, the helplessness. With a violent crack, the ceiling buckled. Flames shot down like an avalanche. Then everything collapsed. The last thing Ethan, Maddie, and Jacob heard was a deafening roar of fire. The last thing Margaret felt was pure, twisted satisfaction. And then silence. By the time the firefighters arrived, it was too late. The house had been reduced to smoldering ruins, the flames having devoured everything. No survivors. Neighbors stood outside, watching in horror. Sirens wailed. The thick scent of burnt wood and death filled the night air. Among the onlookers was Josh Reynolds, Brandon Lewis, and Rachel Donovan. At first, they didn't know. They were just curious residents, staring at the disaster. But then, someone whispered. They say 3 students were inside. Rachel's face went pale. Brandon shook his head. No, that's not possible. Josh grabbed a firefighter's arm. Who? Who was inside? The firefighter hesitated, then checked his notes. 3 names, 3 children. Ethan Reynolds, Maddie Lewis, Jacob Donovan. The moment he said their names, the parents collapsed. No, oh my God, no. Rachel screamed, falling to her knees. Brandon staggered back. Tell me this is a mistake. But it wasn't. Their children were gone. Then, as a horror set in, Josh's phone buzzed. A new message. With shaking hands, he pulled it out. One unread text. From an unknown number. With a pounding heart, he opened it. I always knew I was going to get my revenge for the miserable life you and your friends caused me as a kid. Now, all your children are going to die a miserable death in my house. And I'm glad I'm going to be there with them. Because that is the only thing I ever wanted to achieve before I die. Josh's blood ran cold. Margaret Whitman. This wasn't just a fire. This was revenge. Josh Reynolds staggered backward, his face drained of color. Margaret Whitman. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Rachel and Brandon noticed his reaction. Rachel wiped her tear-streaked face. What is it? She asked, voice shaking. Josh didn't answer immediately. His hands trembled as he stared at the text. The past had finally come back to destroy them. I think I know who did this, he muttered. Brandon's head snapped up. What do you mean? Who? Josh's throat felt tight. Margaret Whitman. She went to school with us. She was that quiet girl. The one we... He stopped himself, but it was too late. Rachel's eyes widened. Oh my God! Memories came flooding back. Margaret Whitman. The girl they tormented. The girl they made fun of for being adopted. The girl who cried in the hallways, alone, broken. The girl they forced out of town. Brandon's voice was hollow. You're saying she came back? That she killed our kids because of what we did back then? Josh's stomach churned. It wasn't just bullying to her. It was her entire life. Rachel clutched her chest, sobbing. My baby, my Jacob. The reality was inescapable. The past wasn't just haunting them. It had destroyed them. The news shattered the town of Millwood. 3 teenagers were gone, burned alive in a fire they never saw coming. Josh Reynolds, Brandon Lewis, and Rachel Donovan sat in their homes, staring at the empty rooms their children once filled. Their laughter, their footsteps, their voices, all gone. Josh clutched a photo of Ethan, his only son. He had raised him to be strong, but had he ever truly taught him kindness? Brandon sat in Maddie's room, running his fingers over her old stuffed animals. His little girl had trusted the wrong person, because he had broken someone years ago. Rachel spent her days in Jacob's bed, curled in his sheets, inhaling the fading scent of her child. She had once laughed at Margaret Whitman. Now, Margaret had taken what she loved most. Regret festered in their hearts. They had thought high school was just a phase, that their bullying had been harmless. But now, they understood the truth. Their cruelty had created a monster, and that monster had come back for everything. They couldn't change the past. But maybe, just maybe, they could stop it from happening again. Weeks passed, but the pain never did. Josh, Brandon, and Rachel knew they had to do something. Their children had paid the ultimate price. But what if they could save someone else's? One evening, they gathered in Rachel's living room. We need to make sure this never happens again, Josh said, his voice raw. Brandon nodded. No child should go through what Margaret did, and no parent should suffer what we have. Rachel wiped away tears. So what do we do? They created the Whitman Foundation, an organization dedicated to fighting bullying in high schools. It was named after the girl they had wronged, the girl whose pain had destroyed them all. Margaret Whitman had been a victim. Then, she had become a monster. But now, her name would stand for something else. A warning, a lesson, a chance for redemption. The first step was the hardest. Returning to Fairview High, the place where it all began. The school agreed to let them speak to the students. A school-wide assembly, a moment of truth. Josh stood before the crowd of teenagers, his throat tight. He had always been the popular kid, the untouchable one, but now he was broken. He took a shaky breath. Years ago, I was just like you, he began. Young, carefree, and a bully. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Students exchanged uneasy glances. Josh continued, his voice cracking. We picked on a girl named Margaret Whitman. She was different, quiet, wore glasses, an easy target. Brandon stepped forward, his eyes glistening. We thought it was funny. We never stopped to think about what we were doing to her. Rachel clutched the microphone, her hands trembling, but she never forgot. She carried that pain with her for years until it became something else. Silence filled the gymnasium. Students leaned in, captivated. Josh's voice was barely above a whisper. And because of what we did, our children are dead. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Some students looked away. Others had tears in their eyes. Brandon cleared his throat. Bullying isn't just a joke. It's not just a phase. It ruins lives. Rachel took a deep breath. Please learn from our mistakes. Don't let another Margaret Whitman be created. The auditorium sat in stunned silence. For the first time in their lives, Josh, Brandon, and Rachel weren't bullies. They were warning signs. And maybe, just maybe, someone in that crowd would listen. Days passed and their message spread. Students whispered about the assembly. Some felt guilt over their own actions. Others promised to change. Teachers spoke in hushed tones. They had seen Margaret Whitman walk these halls, eyes filled with sorrow. Now, she was everywhere and nowhere. Her name was written in news articles. Her story was shared in classrooms. She had been forgotten once. She would never be forgotten again. The Whitman Foundation grew, reaching other schools, other towns. Parents called, thanking them. Survivors of bullying stepped forward, sharing their own stories. One afternoon, Josh stood outside Fairview High, staring at the memorial plaque the school had placed near the entrance. It read, "In memory of Margaret Whitman, may we never ignore pain again." Rachel touched the plaque, her lips trembling. Do you think she would forgive us? Brandon exhaled. I don't know. Josh clenched his fists. But I hope, wherever she is, she knows we're trying. The wind whispered through the trees. For a moment, it almost sounded like a sigh. One night, as Rachel prepared for bed, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Her breath caught. No, it couldn't be. Hands shaking, she answered. Hello. Silence. Then a faint, almost familiar voice. You finally understand. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes. Margaret? Static crackled. Then nothing. The call was gone. Rachel stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Margaret Whitman was dead. But maybe, just maybe, she had been waiting for them to make things right. The years passed. The pain never truly left, but neither did the lesson. The Whitman Foundation thrived, spreading awareness, helping bullied kids before they became tragedies. One day, Josh stood in a new high school auditorium, looking at hundreds of students. He cleared his throat. I once made a mistake that I can never undo, he began, and I lost my son because of it. The room fell silent. But I can stop it from happening again, and so can you. Brandon and Rachel stood beside him, their eyes filled with purpose. Margaret Whitman had been broken. She had become a nightmare. But in the end, she had changed the world. And maybe, just maybe, that was her revenge after all. The end.